To this session that's part of Arts and Sciences Career Week. We have a panel of distinguished alumni from Arts and Sciences who are here with us today to talk about some of their experiences and provide some career advice for those in attendance here today. Since we'll be recording the whole session, then we'll have this available to people in the future as well. I'm Bob Frank. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, so I'll be moderating the session. And we have with us today, again, three of our distinguished alumni. I'm going to let them talk a little bit about their backgrounds, but I will introduce them here in order. We have David Levy here on closest to me, and in the middle, David Wolford, and then Lisa Matz. With us here today. So I'd ask them each to start by just giving a little background about how they ended up here today. So David, you want to just go ahead?
Okay, I can start. If you'd asked me when I graduated, I would find myself sitting here today, I would have laughed for a long time. And I never would have dreamt someone would refer to me as a distinguished alumni. So that's quite a pleasant surprise. My story is I graduated in 1978 with a mathematics degree and entered the workforce with great hope, just hope to get a job. And for me, it was, I would talk to anybody who would talk to a math major. And I was lucky enough to enter the workforce at a time when that was a possibility. But what ended up happening for me was I went into management, and I spent my whole career in information technology management, working in the field of information technology, scientific publishing for the most part. I guess the thing that brings me here is that I had this great opportunity. I had a really fulfilling career, and I had this great education at Ohio University to credit for that. And so I always felt that my turning point in my opportunity to become a contributing adult to society and that really led to my career opportunities was really my time here. So the thing that brings me back is looking for a chance to pay back a little bit or pay forward, if you prefer that way. So I think that's
Great.
it.
So I think the students are pretty much over this way, is that right?
Yeah.
Other than JR.
Right.
Let me just take the opportunity to walk over to you and get a little bit out of the light so I can actually see who you are. Like David, I graduated in the 70s, a little bit before David, 1974. Not that David was slower than me, he's just younger than me. But anyhow, when I left School of Arts and Sciences, I graduated here in 4 years, came in 1970, so some 48 years ago, which is a long time ago. And I've had a love affair with the university since the first time I set foot on campus. But like you, I have a degree from the School of Arts and Sciences. But today, I run a public company that's in the steel business. And I started out in the steel business in 1974. And when I left the campus, I did not have a job and wondered what I was going to do. But I knew where I wanted to live. And at that time, I wanted to live in Washington, D.C., and I had a college roommate who had moved down. He graduated 6 months before me, and we roomed together for a short period of time in D.C., and I indeed found a job in the steel business. But I have a degree in government, which we now call political science, but at the time it was government. I went on the Hill, which is Washington, D.C., and applied for some jobs. But in 1974 was another one of those recession years, and there wasn't a lot of jobs available. My father had been in the steel business. He had actually worked outside of Washington, D.C. at the time, and hadn't left there in the 50s, but I remembered the name of the company, and so I dialed it up and invited myself in, and I was told the general manager then of that facility that I needed a job. And he gave me a job on the spot because I picked up the phone, called him, went in, told him what my background is. I've been in this field now for 44 years. Let me explain to you that in business, a liberal arts education is most welcome. You're critical thinkers. You can adapt to the culture of any business that you go into. And let me talk to you about the businesses that you might go into. They're all communities. You know, I sort of smile a little bit. My 3 children are all in their 30s, so they're adults, they're all working, they do well, so forth and so on. 2 of them live in Chicago, 1 lives in Cleveland. I lived in New York, I've lived in Boston, we talked about that a little bit. I lived in Washington, D.C., as I talked to you a little bit. But one of the interesting things about living in big cities is the illusion that when you live in the big city, you have all of the facilities at your beck and call. But the reality is, when you live in a big city, as I've lived in a lot of big cities, as I just outlined, you really live in the community. The small 4 or 5 block community, 6 block community. You use the dry cleaner in that community. You use the restaurants in that community. And quite frankly, when you're graduating Ohio University, and if you're moving to a big city, I'm going to pretty much guess that you can't afford all of those options that are in the big city because they're expensive. So you stay in the community. Why do I talk to you about community? I talk to you about community because every business is a community. I'm in the steel business, it's the steel community. Others are in, JR's in development, that's a community. He's with the university, that's a community. So with a liberal arts education, you have a variety of communities that you can go to. I'm thrilled you're here today. When I left the university, it was a recession. You're leaving the university, it's not a recession. As a matter of fact, you're in high demand today, very high demand. The unemployment is exceedingly low. It hasn't been this low in years. There are job postings all over the place. And I would encourage you to, one, decide where you want to live. Where do you want to live? Right? This is a bit of an adventure. You're starting out. Where do you want to live? 2, once you decide where you want to live, let's start applying for jobs. You don't have to move there, but let's start applying for jobs. I'm going to tell you right now, the prosperity of this country looks very strong. There was a tax bill that was just passed. I'm in industry in the steel business. I run $1.5 billion business, and we are constantly growing. The only way we can grow is if we have the support of human capital around us. We're looking for people like you. Now, the mere fact that industry is maybe a little bit unknown on the campus today, and that the steel industry maybe sounds like Cro-Magnon, period, it's not. It's a vibrant industry that deals in currencies around the world and requires a broad education, of which all of you have received here from the School of Arts and Science. I tell you, you're a valuable commodity today, a very valuable commodity. Now, I couldn't make that speech in 2009, nor could I make that speech in 1974 when I graduated, because those were recession years. But you're not in a recession year. You're in a hyper-growth environment, and you have the ability to secure that job. As a matter of fact, you already have a job right now. Your job is to find a job. That's your job. The second job you get is the job that you find. Right? Now, when you're interviewing, I don't want you prejudicing yourself and saying, I don't want to work here. I want you interviewing as if this is the only job that you'll ever get and the only job you want for the sake of that interview at that time. So in fact, when they call you back for a second interview and you do really well because you're not prejudicing, because the fact of the matter might be that you don't like the steel business, but you really don't know much about it. But you could certainly go on the internet and find out about it today. So those resources exist. I want you interviewing as though you want this job, because I want you to have the ability to say no once they offer you the job, rather than the employer, potential employer, saying no to you. I want you to win the job. Now, it's not that difficult today. You should have the confidence and the courage to go out and make those applications, because there's a shortfall of qualified people out there today. So I'm going to tell you, you have a great education. You have a broad base. I wished everybody had a liberal arts education, because you're clear thinkers, decisive, and that's what business culture wants. So I want you to have that confidence to go out there today. From my perspective, again, 44 years in the steel business, I got into it. So I teased my wife of 40 years, and we've been together for the same 44 years. I met her in Washington, D.C. It's only a temporary job. It's just a temporary job. I'll find something that's really, really good. But it is really, really good, and it's what you make of it, right? So if you go in with the attitude that you really have a precious commodity. Folks, running a public company means growth. Nobody wants to invest in a public equity if that equity is not growing. You'll find that out when you work, if you have savings plans, 401k plans, Roth IRAs, whatever investment you make in a company that you expect to grow. A company that I run and a company that others run expect that same growth. That growth comes by hiring qualified people. When I talk to the people who work for us as an industry, when I talk to general managers, one of our sales managers is Kyle Triplett. He's over here. He graduated here 6 years ago. 6 years ago, was a student trustee here. He was so impressive that I went down to see him to come on over and do an internship with us, and then eventually work for us, which he has for the last 6 years. And today he's managing 7, 8 people, I don't know, $150 million worth of business, $200 million worth of business, something along those lines. Kyle graduated from the School of Arts and Sciences, as you are. So it's a small group here. I want to encourage you not to just send in a resume on the internet. I want to encourage you that decide where you would like to live. That's key. Where do I want to live? And then apply for jobs. Take some time, go up to that area, and then a little shoe leather and knock on some particular doors of people that are advertising for jobs, and present yourself well, and I guarantee you'll win a job. My daughter, who graduated here in 2008, took 6 months off, traveled in Asia, came out in 2009 for a job. Not a good time. Decided she wanted to live in Chicago. Went up, we did the same thing. We just had her commute back and forth and apply for jobs, right? Stay with a friend, use your networking, so forth and so on. She eventually got a job. She's in her second day of a new job today after having graduated 9 years ago. And as she said, and no offense here, as she said to me last night after her first day on the job, I got a big girl's job, Dad. So it is a terrific career job after having spent 8 years in retail. So folks, I want to encourage you to recognize the fact that you have a precious commodity that people like me are looking for. And if you have the courage to try out some industry or any industry, you are going to be most welcome. Because for us in a growth industry, it's not about who we fire, it's about who we hire. We have to hire great people, and we have to hire people who want to come to work, who want to learn, right, and are ambitious and have great intellect, right, and want to be successful. That's my introduction. Let's apply for some jobs. What do you think? They're waiting for you.
Thanks, David. Lisa.
All right. Well, my name is Lisa Matz. I always like to say I'm a lobbyist, but I use my powers for good. I did my undergraduate here in political science and sociology with, at the time, the best you could do was a women's studies certificate, so I got that. And I was one of those people, probably fairly annoying. I never changed my major, but I was sure that I was going to go to law school, and had a class my fall quarter of my senior year that changed all that. Decided I was going to go get a master's in women's studies. Now, this was the late 80s, so that was probably a fairly big risk at the time, but it paid off. I'm a really good example, I think, of how students and graduates from the School of Arts and Sciences, the College of Arts and Sciences, can do a variety of different kinds of jobs, different work, even within your subject matter. So I left OU, went and did my graduate work up the street a little bit at Ohio State in women's studies, and that's when I started my teaching career, and since then have always, in some way, shape, or form, maintained an adjunct appointment because I discovered a real love of teaching. But beyond that, that was also where I started to make some networking and connections, and where I started to really figure out what my next role would be. I always had an interest in politics and public policy, certainly with a gender lens. And my first job out of college, out of graduate school, was running a campus-based women's center over at Wittenberg University in Springfield. So I've done kind of campus-based work. And from there, I actually ran a domestic violence program in Marion. Did that for several years. And that was an interesting time to be in social services work because that was the time of the OJ trial and the first Violence Against Women Act was passed. And I was intimately involved with some of that work. At that point, I really had decided that I wanted to try to get myself to Washington, D.C. Now, if I had known that I could go to Washington, D.C. as a 22-year-old, fresh with my undergraduate degree, and live in a group home, and not make a whole lot of money, eat a lot of noodles, and work on Capitol Hill, I probably would have done that. But I didn't, and in many respects, I feel good about that because I've been able to do so many different things that as I got into my policy career, I was able to go back to and reference social services work, campus-based work, teaching. So I decided at that point that I was going to apply for a congressional fellowship. And it's something that I think a lot of arts and sciences folks overlook is
Bad noise.
I don't know if that was me or, but is don't overlook the possibilities for fellowships. Internships are hugely important as well, but once you graduate, sometimes a fellowship, even before you go to graduate school, can be a good thing. But I got a congressional fellowship. That's how I started my career on Capitol Hill, working for, actually I worked for Carolyn Maloney, who's a Democrat out of New York City. And then from there, I went to the dark side and became a lobbyist. But as I said, I used my powers for good. And since then, have always done work on progressive public policy, women's issues, and civil rights work. The last 15 of which I was with the American Association of University Women, running a comprehensive policy shop, government affairs, state regulatory affairs, so on and so forth. So in that sense, you can see over my career that I've done a variety of different things, but it's really been my arts and sciences background that has been so helpful, especially getting to know a diversity of policy issues. Beyond that, the other thing that I always like to stress is probably the best thing that I got from both my high school and my college education was the ability to write well. I can teach you about gender issues, I can teach you about public policy, I can teach you about congressional procedure. I don't want to have to teach you to write. And that's something that can be a strength for arts and sciences students, because part of what you're doing is critical thinking, is synthesis and analysis of various topics. And it's something that I really want to make sure you're drawing attention to, because it doesn't matter what industry you're interested in, someone who can write well, someone who can communicate well is worth their weight in gold. If you've ever had anybody tell you, a faculty member here, to go to the writing center, or maybe that you needed to spend a little more time developing your writing skills, take that seriously, because you need to be able to communicate, and you need to be able to do so persuasively and effectively. I think in many respects, for the interns that I've had, that's one of the things that I really look for. So that resume, that cover letter, those are your first, in many respects, they're writing tests. And I was to the point that writing became so important in the work that I did that I literally gave applicants, when they came in to interview, a test to do, not go in and tell me what the pronoun or a noun is, but essentially they had to write a letter to Capitol Hill, or they had to write an Action Network message. And I wanted to see if they could turn something, a policy piece of information, into a communication very quickly. And I think for arts and sciences folks, that ability is really part of the bedrock of your education. Since then, obviously then I have been doing a lot of political work, and that's translated not just in terms of public policy, but also politics, working on campaigns, doing the kinds of things necessary to try and get more women and people of color elected. So just a whole range of issues that, once I started down this path, really opened up to me, and I did feel equipped to tackle them because of the diversity of my background with my arts and sciences degree.
Great. So maybe we'll see if there are any questions from anybody out there in the audience.
Hi, I'm Crystal Vincent, a junior studying psychology and women's gender sexuality studies. My question is for you. I want to know, what difficulties did you face going on to Capitol Hill, especially coming from the 80s and after you got your master's?
Yeah.
And how did that go as far as being a woman going into Capitol Hill in that industry?
It's a great question. Capitol Hill is still very much a male-dominated institution. Lobbying, absolutely, is still very much a male-dominated job. It can differ depending on what industry you're in terms of what issue you're actually lobbying. But the reality is, especially as you get farther up, like the jobs I had in terms of being a vice president and running a government relations shop, is really very much male-dominated. Now, I worked in the progressive community, and so that had a little bit more diversity, I think, than in general, and that was useful. There's a couple of things that I found to be really important in trying to do this work, and networking is key. If you really want to work in Washington, D.C., if you want to get a job on Capitol Hill, there's going to be only one thing that I'm going to disagree with you on, and that is you need to be in Washington, D.C. These are not the jobs that you can apply for from here. And because the reality is, Washington, D.C. is filled with folks like you, the folks who are smart and accomplished and used to kind of being the cream of the crop of their class. You go to Washington, D.C., that's everybody, right? And so one thing you want to take off the table of where you start looking not competitive is having an address on your resume that isn't local, because I have a whole stack of resumes of folks that are right here. I don't need to bring you in. Does that make sense? So in many respects, if you want to go to Washington, D.C., you want to get into politics, whether it's working on Capitol Hill or working for an advocacy organization, or quite frankly, working for the federal government, having a local address, even if it's only a post office box, but use that network is really important. And investing in yourself and understanding that if you aren't going to move there right away, you need to be able to get there quickly for jobs. So that's one thing I would say. The other thing is networking for women in DC becomes particularly important. I'm going to share a story from some friends of mine in the Obama administration, because even in that particular administration, the women executives were having a hard time getting heard. And so they actually kind of banded together and decided to kind of take some steps themselves to address that. And this was something that was really persuasive and that I certainly see within the community. When I was on Capitol Hill, we had a group called the Sister Chiefs, which were all the women chiefs of staff. And that doesn't mean we didn't interact with the guys that were chiefs of staff, but we also interacted with other women who knew exactly what we were doing and doing it in the same kind of environment. So anyway, this great advice from the Obama administration, leaders in the Obama administration, they really made a determination that part of what needed to happen in terms of getting their ideas heard, getting their ideas implemented, getting the respect and the recognition that they deserved in the administration, that they had to have each other's backs, right? So I'm going to ask you all a question. You don't necessarily have to raise your hand, but just think about it. If you've ever been in a meeting and a question's been asked or someone's looking for a good idea, and you've got that great idea and somebody else says it first, because you just kind of sat there for a bit thinking, should I talk, should I not talk, sitting on your hands. The other thing that happens, quite frankly, a fair amount to women, and this has been studied over and over again, particularly by the Harvard Business School, is that a woman will put an idea out on the table and there might be some discussion, but then the conversation moves on and the guy 3 seats down says the same thing and suddenly it's E equals MC squared. And so this is what the Obama administration women, this is Valerie Jarrett and Tina Chen and those folks decided to do, was that anytime a woman put an idea out there, they were going to back her up. And it wasn't just about liking the idea, it was literally as simple as naming it, right? So I just want to say that the information that Crystal put forward was really interesting to me. So they actually said the person's name and then reiterated what the idea was, so that ownership of the idea as well as the idea itself was something that was kind of reinforced. So those kinds of strategies, there's lots of good networking websites and so forth where you can get tips, but that's one in terms of Washington, D.C. that I found to be particularly helpful. And then the last thing I would say is that networking is hugely important. In D.C., D.C. is a company town. And today's intern is tomorrow's chief of staff. And so part of the other thing that you always need to keep in mind is the relationships that you maintain, being careful about burning bridges, hopefully not. These things in particular, because reputation can be all in any industry, can be particularly important for women. But if you want to go to DC and work on Capitol Hill, the first thing I would say that you need to do is, number one, try to intern in the district office here in the state. I would say that then you can look at trying to get an internship on Capitol Hill, because they're really not going to hire you for an LA job, a legislative assistant job, if you haven't interned on Capitol Hill. So start on those internships. And from there, that's where you're going to make those networks. The one difficulty there is that you have to choose sides, right? So the reality is you can intern in a Democratic office and then try to work in a Republican office, but it doesn't always work so well in terms of when they look at your resume and they see you as part of their family, right? So you actually need to make some choices ahead of time about who you work for and how that works, because that will have an impact on your opportunities down the road.
Are there any other questions from any of the audience? So I want to follow up on that then with a question about networking to our other two panelists and how that's either had an impact in your life or generally what you'd have to say about it.
I'm happy to go.
Yeah.
Networking for me was a little bit maybe different than some. Entering the workforce didn't really require a lot of networking on my part. I had the good fortune to be able to go through the sort of classical interview on campus, get an interview on site, got a job. But what I would want to emphasize to you is that once you find that job, once you're in the door, networking maybe becomes even more important. And I don't know if you even need to call it networking in a sense, but what's really critical is to develop good relationships with everybody around you. In my case, I was responsible for some pretty significant large-scale software engineering projects. And in this corporate setting, if you're in information technology and you're writing software, you can't get anywhere if you don't have the infrastructure technology guys working with you. And you've got to be able to communicate well with the business units that you're writing the software projects for. So developing these relationships with peers, senior management, individual contributors, it's absolutely essential that you are able to talk to these people and relate to them, get to know them, and then you have something to build on when you actually have work to do with them. It's something that really became a critical part of my career, and I think was a really important part of my ability to get the job done and help my teams get the job done. So it's something that's really all aspects of what you do. And my guess is that if you think about it, it's probably going on in your life outside of school, or even in school. Everywhere you are, you're probably working on relationships with people to help you get things done that you want to do, and you may not even think about it. So that's what I would really want to emphasize, is this idea of continuing to build your networks, emphasize having good relationships with everybody, and like Lisa said, don't burn any bridges. It's never worthwhile.
So just following in the row here, and I'll echo some of the same sentiments that Dave just talked about. When I said earlier, whatever industry you're in or whatever line of work you're in, I view that as a community. Networking, I think, is a very broad topic. And so when you're involved, I'm in the steel business, so I'm very involved with trade organizations. That's another way to network. I've run trade organizations. I've run the government affairs for trade organizations as a sidebar. Again, it's your community, and so you're reaching out and getting a deeper knowledge and more contacts within your industry. I'm a commercial person, so I started out as a residential, ultimately what they call a resident salesperson. So I lived in an area, and I sold for a steel mill in Boston, as a matter of fact, and I lived in Boston proper, and then fanned out from there. But the whole idea of living in the community that you sell and do business in is in itself a network. You're going to the same grocery store. If you have kids, you're at the soccer games with kids at the baseball game, and so forth and so on. And again, you're just broadening your reach into a community, and the community has support for you in many ways. So I would encourage you to be involved with trade organizations. Elise pointed that out earlier. I'd also would encourage you at that point in time to, expand your role in your line of work and take on different challenges. Part of what I do today is I'm part of, they call Industry Trade Advisory Committee, and that's an adjunct to the Department of Commerce by the 1974 trade law. Department of Commerce has to, and USTR, United States Trade Representative, have to seek expert opinions on 16 different categories before trade law can be passed. So I'm involved in that. As a matter of fact, I'll be in Washington on Monday in the Steel Trade Organization, which is called ITEC 12, which is about to be renamed ITEC 7, because this administration is renumbering these like that makes a difference, which it doesn't. But regardless, it is just another avenue of expanding your field and your role and your knowledge and your contacts. And quite frankly, all that stuff is available. In my role on ITEC, I applied under the Bush administration. W. Bush's group gave me the thumbs up, but it was late in the year. The Obama administration was coming in. They asked the Bush administration not to appoint anybody, and then I was appointed by the Obama administration twice, and I'm looking to be reappointed. Quite frankly, as it goes today, is kind of interesting, but on February 13th, this administration hasn't appointed anybody, reappointed anybody, and February 13th, by my calculations, is 12 days away, I think. Maybe a little help from somebody in D.C. But nevertheless, it's just another way to broaden the network. So there's a lot of opportunities outside, as Dean Frank asked, to continue to invest in your respective career that is not necessarily directly attached with the paycheck that you get. But that's part of your responsibility to broaden your own horizon.
One thing I did want to put out there is networking, I think, when you think about it as an idea, as an activity you should be engaging in. And I hope all of you are going to come to the networking reception tonight as part of Arts and Sciences Career Week. Networking for introverts. Not everybody loves a crowd. Not everybody, and it doesn't mean that you're shy, it just perhaps is a way that you get your energy is not from being in a crowd. You might dread and think, oh, I don't want to go to this event, I'm not going to know anybody there, what am I going to do? Even in those situations, you need to challenge yourself because you do need to build networks and you also need to continue to grow personally. So one of the tips and tricks that I always use, because believe it or not, I'm an introvert. I would much rather be home reading a book or thinking deep thoughts about how to pass legislation than necessarily working a room. But the reality is if I don't work the room, I can't pass the bill, right? So I need to be able to work the room. So what I would do, especially when I first started on Capitol Hill, was I would go to all the receptions that I could and I would make a deal with myself. My deal was if I met 3 people, I could leave. I had to meet 3 new people. Now, that may sound like not very much, but at these kinds of receptions, at the reception that we're having tonight, if you talk to 3 different people, you're going to meet more people because they're going to know people. They're going to introduce you. It becomes kind of a serial introduction and conversation. Make sure that you are challenging yourself to do this, even if it doesn't feel like networking is your strong suit, because you need to be able to have these conversations. How do you find the people to talk to? I mean, nobody likes to walk up necessarily to a group that looks like it's kind of closed and they're all talking to each other already, and how do you interject yourself? Trust me, there are other introverts who've just made the same deal with themselves, walking around the room. They're usually around the sides of the room, and you find one of those, and oftentimes that will start your conversation. They'll know somebody, and it'll go from there. So, do what you need to do to make sure whether it's deals with yourself or challenges or some kind of reward, that you're going to trade events, professional association events, even when you feel like you don't know anybody. Those, in fact, are the ones you need to go to. The other tip that I would give you is, always have your business cards. Although I'm a horrible example of that because my business cards are sitting on my kitchen table right now. But the other thing is I always write down on the business card what I kind of interacted with that person about. I might even write a physical description because I'm better with faces than I am with names. I might write down what I need to follow up with that person on. This networking, it doesn't have to be a chore. It is interesting. It is an opportunity. Every interaction is an opportunity.
Any other questions from folks out in the audience? Yeah.
Hello. Ooh. I'm Abby. I'm a second year. I'm a psych major. And as you guys are kind of like talking about, you can kind of do like a lot of different things with an arts and science degree. So I'm just wondering sort of like how you personally sort of narrowed the options down and like picked a path, because that's sort of where I'm at. I feel like I just need to pick a path. Like once I have a goal, I'm all set, but it's so hard to like pick something.
My reaction to that is don't pick a path yet. Seriously, I don't think you can possibly have any clue as to the incredible breadth of opportunity and all the things that are available to you and where your best skills may line up with the jobs that are there. So my reaction to that is pursue everything that looks like it's an opportunity to you. If there are people on campus, and go talk to them, learn about what they do, and just don't narrow yourself yet. I think that's your best bet on that. Maybe if it feels uncomfortable and you may feel pressure to go after a specific area, but you said you're a sophomore? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you do. You do and you don't.
Thanks,
Let me, okay, so I'll take my opportunity to preach a little bit here. You have as a sophomore, you've got at least 2, right? Hopefully not more. But in these 2 years you have an opportunity to really broaden the things you're taking. So the thing I am always trying to encourage people to do is whatever your discipline is within the College of Arts and Sciences, find something at the exact opposite end of it and take a couple classes in that. And if you're a heavily technically oriented person, you should be getting out there and taking an English class and an art history class and philosophy. If you're in that realm of your discipline, get into the technical area, learn something about how to work with computers, and because that kind of balance is really going to be valuable to you. And so you got some time to do it. Go do it now.
I'll get a little folksy about this for you. Life is like a long drive across Nebraska. It can be flat and boring unless you do something about it. And so ultimately, you decide whether you're going to speed a little bit and entertain yourself. You decide whether somebody's going to go left of center as you're driving and you have to do something defensive. You decide if there's a breakdown that you have to repair something. All of these aspects of life are not the path that you might have designed yourself to go down. But there are opportunities for you as you drive this long road of life. And you have to seize those opportunities. And I think that as I look at these, I never really have expectations. I do have objectives. And so if you have objectives, you don't necessarily have to accomplish them all at once. But if you have expectations, many times if you have expectations, you're rehearsing for the expectations. But the circumstances don't present themselves that allow you to use all the rehearsed lines that you practiced in front of the mirror and all the expectations that you might have in life. Because there's 7 billion people in this world, and they don't know what your expectations are, and they're doing other things, and there's a lot of, diversions along this particular road. I think that's one of the beauties of leaving Ohio University with a degree from the School of Arts and Sciences, is that you are flexible, malleable, and you're willing to explore other opportunities, and you're willing to do things that help you grow personally. I think all of those. I think if you're flexible in that manner, I think you'll be eminently more successful. I don't think there is one given path, unless you're in the sciences and you're doing some research and things along those lines. But if you're generally doing that, you probably aren't coming out of arts and sciences, but you might.
You know, the other thing that I would say is, especially being a sophomore, but it really doesn't matter what year you are, doing an internship, in fact, doing a bunch of internships is really important. I love the suggestion of look at folks who you find interesting as jobs maybe you'd like to have when you grow up, so to speak. Do some research on them on LinkedIn. Do some research on their company online. And look at various opportunities for internships. Internships can really broaden your networks, give you a sense of if you like something or not. Quite frankly, an internship can eliminate you from something. You might do, I don't know, I had an internship at a law firm and I was like, yeah, that's not what I'm gonna do. That was valuable, right? So the reality is thinking carefully about your internships, looking at folks who have jobs, careers, lifestyles that you like, that you would like to emulate, and then doing what you can in terms of finding out more about them and having those internships. I think the internships really are key. I mean, the summer is oftentimes when people do it, but there's a lot of resources right here in the Athens community. If you're looking for a variety of different opportunities to shadow people at work, if you're interested in public policy, there are city council people right here, right? There are county registrars right here. There's a way to kind of take advantage of the opportunities that are here, as well as maybe doing a summer internship. Now, the other note that I'm going to throw in there is that not all in fact, most internships are not paid. Some are, some aren't. This obviously is an issue because a lot of us work our way through school, and getting a summer job that pays to help us pay for school is a big deal. And so it can, in some ways, mitigate what we can take advantage of in terms of an internship. If you find yourself in that position, part of what you need to do is, like I said, come up with some different alternatives that perhaps don't take as much time but can still expose you to different ideas and opportunities, whether it's job shadowing, whether it's trying to do events like this. There are so many events here at Ohio University about how to find a job, how to network, that folks don't necessarily take advantage of. I know you only have 24 hours in the day, but take advantage of the things that you can, because at the end of the day, an internship is going to be huge, and you do want to make sure that you have more than one, quite frankly.
I'm going to use my prerogative to comment on this. I think it's along the theme of opportunity, that you'll have opportunities that will arise that won't be requirements that you need to think about seriously. So some of the ones have been mentioned here. Getting involved in research projects, getting involved in internships, doing a study away, study abroad, doing service learning, doing a bunch of those kinds of things that aren't necessarily required, but I think really start to grow your network and then also build your resume. So they give you a glimpse into some possibilities for the future. But I think this keeping your eyes open, it's overwhelming. I mean, that's part of the problem, right? It's overwhelming how many opportunities are here, but some of them are going to resonate. And when those, come to your attention, that's that's where you take the step. Have the courage to say, okay, I'm gonna do this. Like showing up today. Good job. Okay, we might have time for one more question, if there are any. Lisa, did you want to say anything about other events here shortly?
Thank you to all of the panelists, and we look forward to having you join many of our students so that they can meet you at our networking reception, and want to just encourage everyone here to take advantage of resume review roundtables, recruiters, and questions, and networking with alumni from across the entire College of Arts and Sciences.
Okay. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.